Welcome to Sanguine Arts Locavart, the podcast that features interviews with local Twin Cities artists. This activity is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. I am your host, Mary Prescott, interdisciplinary artist, composer, and pianist. Today we are speaking with José A. Luis. José is an independent choreographer and dancer now based in Minneapolis. Born in Veracruz, Mexico, and raised in Racine, Wisconsin, José has lived in Milwaukee, Chicago, and now Minneapolis as of 2017. Relocation, returning, arrival, and departure influence his work using time and space as motifs. Dance offered him a way to communicate without words while offering interpretation to those he shared the room with. Considered a late dancer, his ability to learn and unlearn in sync led him to graduate University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee with a BFA in 2013. Circumstances have led him to serve as both choreographer and dancer in a solo path while welcoming collaborations, residencies to reflect who he is in dance, and presentations to inform shifts in his perspectives. Determination led to his first self-produced solo show, in September 2021 by threading pieces over 9 years and across different cities, cementing his voice as an independent artist. The intimate, introspective, honest approach of his choreography is also present in his dancing, paving the way as a dancer in other artists' work. José's tenacity, skill, and acceptance in navigating the imperfectness of being human is at the forefront of who he is, in and outside the dance floor. Welcome, José. Thank you for speaking with us today.
Thank you.
Your biography talks about relocation, returning, arrival, and departure as influential on your work, and you have lived in multiple different cities over the past years. Can you tell us about your experiences with these concepts and places, past and present, and how they have impacted your artistry?
Yeah, I will say, I think this was the first time that I've actually heard my bio be read by someone else. And I can't believe it's taken that long. And it's so weird because in writing that bio, I spent a lot of time reworking it and shifting it, that I always feel that it's a lot for me to consider where I am in any moment and shift along with it. So thank you for that moment of like, wow, yeah, okay, this I'm hearing it from someone else, and I still agree with what it says, and I feel it. But yeah, in terms of your question, I feel like every city has offered me its own challenges and
Mm-hmm.
ways for me to grow and learn and consider who I am in any moment.
Mm-hmm.
I think Milwaukee, for instance, departing from uh, 18 years in Racine, Wisconsin or so, and then arriving in Milwaukee, 30, 45 minutes away was like a good medium to consider distance between me and my family.
Mm-hmm.
For better or worse, it allowed me to stay near to them while also offering me space to like figure out who I am and uh, dive right into the dance world and that education.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and shortly after I moved to Chicago upon graduating, because I was fortunate enough to like have a dance opportunity right after college, which was like super exciting. Because I was like, oh my god, this dream is actually possible to like uh, have a career in dance. And so moving to Chicago was like really like living what I thought that version of dancing is,
Mm-hmm.
which was, I discovered, very difficult financially.
Mm-hmm.
I had set a goal for myself to not be in the food industry because I had been doing that for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like really was trying to become a new version of myself and like welcome a lot of new things and just
Mm-hmm.
say yes to many opportunities. but that ended up financially like being a little bit of a struggle because I uh, I ran into not being paid as much in the dance field,
Mm-hmm.
and I still loved it, but I eventually it was a big realization that I couldn't live off of it.
Yeah.
So I had to really like make a decision to buckle down and just decide, you know what, I need to find a full time job with benefits so that I can support myself
Mm-hmm.
to do whatever else I need to do. And I think that was the big moment where I really committed to doing my own solo work in my own time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then uh, that in turn just like brought me back to Racine actually when I was 25 to
Mm-hmm.
live with my parents. And I had intended for that to be like a couple of months, but ended up being a year. And that was really like, that was pretty difficult. I just wasn't dancing, and like, I, my physical health was like probably at the lowest it has been.
Hmm.
And I just was unmotivated and moving to Minneapolis, I think a year after, like still I was unsure of who I was.
Mm-hmm.
And as uh, cheesy as it sounds, like it really, once I found my way back to dance, like it, I just felt so much more alive and fulfilled, and
Yeah.
I was questioning a lot of myself in a better and healthier way,
Mm-hmm.
um, mentally and emotionally, and then physically. Like I started to like feel and see this transformation happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it came time to do this solo show, like I was looking back at all these pieces that I had done in Milwaukee and Chicago, um, and it was been great to like reflect on those pieces and those versions of me that existed those in those times. And I like thank them, and they are still with me.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and I feel like in reflecting, I had to be those versions to arrive at where I am now, which is like really, I think, at a better place holistically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, departure, arriving in a physical state
Mm-hmm.
of where I am located, um, but also like mentally and emotionally of like continually asking myself like who I am in those instances has been very uh, tenacious work, and I still feel it today, even when I leave Minneapolis for a weekend
Mm-hmm.
and Sunday comes in and I'm like, okay, Monday I got to go back to the grind and like really um, set
Buckle in.
myself right. Yeah, buckle in.
What brought you to Minneapolis?
It was a full time job.
Okay.
Yeah, I was ready to I was ready to move anywhere in the country for a full time job.
Hmm.
And I had visited Minneapolis because I had a friend from college here and I had a good support system here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but where dance brought me to Chicago, uh, what I would say, like, the emotional side of me was like, yes to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, even though my heart was set in Minneapolis for great art scene and the support system and not too far from Racine, logistically, I had to like really, I knew I had to make like the financial decision to come up here.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily, it all worked out where I got a full time job here.
Mm-hmm.
And then I, I started to like feel at a good place to start making work again and then really fulfilling this dream of like creating a solo show, which I had been wanting to do for so long. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it worked out.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Hmm.
Um, do you feel that the stability of having a full time job allows you to maintain the balance of being a creator?
Mm, totally. Yeah. I mean, it has gotten in the way sometimes. Like
Yeah.
ironically, like in feeling, um, like I embody all versions of myself now. Like I still feel that tension of work and
Mm-hmm.
then the dance work. Uh, but I feel at peace with that because I I don't think that I could do one or the other without them both existing.
Yeah.
And I do see a lot of artists who are in it all the time, and they're making it work, and it's I a part of me is jealous sometimes, but then um, when I get the little glimpse of it when I am doing the dance work for X amount of time, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I just need a little break from this, and like I need to like um, just be in this cycle of a little monotonous work where I just don't have to like think and I can just do. And
Mm-hmm.
so my full time job allows that, and then vice versa. I'm like, oh my god, I just like I need to leave work early, or I need vacation time so that I can fulfill
Yeah.
this the heart of me that is like uh, wanting to like make meaningful work, and that's where
Yeah.
dance comes in. So
Yeah.
it feels like a great balance right now. So yeah.
That's so great to hear.
Hmm.
And I think there is kind of that like uh I don't want to call it a myth because I don't know if it's a myth, but
Hmm.
that like that an artist should be making all of their income from and they should be working in their art all the time. I think that's,
Hmm.
it's kind of perhaps it looks ideal, but the
Hmm.
realities of that are not as they're not so plain and they're not so simple,
Right.
Like I think having that stability piece takes off a lot of the strain of being a creator in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. I was in conversation with someone maybe a month ago because they were telling me how they've dedicated a lot of their education on dance, and
Mhm.
like that's they've worked very hard at learning as much as they could, and now they're out of school, and they're not getting a lot of work. And they were asking me like how what I'm doing. And it really was. I was like, well, it was a lot of years of like asking myself that question of like, what am I doing?
Mhm.
What do I want to be doing? And it has led to like saying, yeah, no to like free artistic jobs. um, it has led no to saying dance for a little bit and like really finding some financial stability, and then it has come to like say yes again to dance, and yes on my own terms. And for me it has led to that solo work, which where I was saying yes, like I won't pay myself, uh, but the value of what dance is creating and supporting for me mentally and emotionally and physically is so much more valuable than getting paid, and it's on my own time.
Mhm.
So um, yeah, I mean, it has taken a lot of time, and I'm 32 now, so it's like they're a little bit younger, and I'm like, you're asking the right questions, and I don't think there's any right formula
Right.
because time itself is changing, and things are different for me. um, and so it's always this reflection and constant questioning, and that's, I think that is at the core of being both an artist and non-artist. Is like you gotta ask yourself like what are you doing and who do you want to be. So um, yeah, constant balance act.
And everybody's needs are different.
Exactly.
Hmm. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
Um, could you tell us more about where you grew up and your youth and how your earlier life experiences influence your work?
Yeah, so I was born in Minatitlan, Veracruz, Mexico, which is on the east coast of Mexico by the Gulf of Mexico. And it's very tropical and humid. Um,
Pretty different
and
than the Midwest.
yes, yes, it is constantly just, yeah, you like, anytime I visit, I always tell my mom, I'm like, we gotta like start our day very early, be back by 11 a.m., and stay inside until like 6 p.m. and
Mm,
then continue because it can be unbearable, and it's or at least for us as visitors,
mm,
because we're visitors now. Um, but during the time that I was there, and I was there very young years, so I really don't remember a lot of it. Um, I do remember. Uh, I think I was 4, and I was brought to the U.S. and I had started kindergarten here, and then I think halfway through the year, my mom and I went back to Mexico,
mm-hmm,
and I finished the other half there, and then we came back, and then the summers we would go back. So it was, I like, I remember being in school at both locations,
mm-hmm,
and I remember like learning how to read and write with my mom.
mm-hmm,
Um, and then wearing my uniform in school in Mexico because that's very traditional.
mm-hmm,
And then I would come to the US and I would put on my jackets and my layers, and I've only really reflected on this like again in like being asked like who I am and where I come from.
mm-hmm,
But that those like 2 years were just so strange and so uh, so matter of the fact. Like I don't question my sanity because of it. Like
mm-hmm,
it seems like it's a way of life. And then when I think back of my cousins and my family that are still in Mexico, like yeah, like everyone has their own version of life and they navigate it as best they can. And other people may make choices around you,
mm-hmm,
and the fact that we can return back is so beautiful, and it's
mm,
just another version um, of feeling your own choice and feeling empowered.
mm-hmm,
That those things are just have become so important to my work of always having the ability to go back.
mm-hmm,
And go back is, to me, sometimes it's like going back to Racine and just being taken care of by my parents, and just like
mm-hmm,
having them cook for me or bring me food, and it's just like really like uh, feeling unconditional love, and like feeling that I can be myself.
mm-hmm,
And the other part is like leaving that and coming here, and working and like taking care of myself and of the other artists that I work with or the community that I'm a part of, and like really engaging in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but for me, but yeah, it's really those early years of returning to partying and just keeping at it has, I think, is a lot of that represents a lot of uh, people of colors that were always working, and it's
Mm-hmm.
there's just no question that we have to keep at it, whatever that is.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm.
Um, along along a similar line of what you just mentioned, your how do your identities as a queer Mexican immigrant brought bilingual dance artist inform your work?
It's taken me a lot of time to accept them.
Mm-hmm.
um, Maybe acknowledge them as well. Like in my early years, I was in bilingual classes in my elementary years,
Mm-hmm.
and as a whole, when all of the other classes would go out to recess, we would line up in the hallways, and then um, we were always different. Everyone knew it,
Mm-hmm.
and we, as a collective class, we stuck together because we had formed this understanding of what we look like and
Mm-hmm.
what people see, and other students like asking if we actually know English,
Mm-hmm.
and so even from that moment, it was just there's there's a thing about being accepted
Mm-hmm.
that was just part of our journey, and I think that had continued for so long in my life,
Mm-hmm.
and it has kind of gone hand in hand with this work ethic, because I remember uh, testing a little bit higher in the ESL classes,
Mm-hmm.
English as Second Language,
Mm-hmm.
that eventually there was a gap within my own elementary class where there were the students that were learning English at a faster and quicker rate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so there was already like a little strain in this idea of difference.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and eventually, like into middle school, I was placed into quote unquote regular English classes. And and then the friends that I had met in elementary years that were also in middle school, like I just would see less of them because they were still a little bit in the uh, bilingual classes.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
But I, I don't know. I knew that I just had to like keep going and like learning and like really dedicate myself to progressing, which
Mm-hmm.
to my parents was a little bit of why we were brought here, is to like learn and really stay ahead and make something more than like our parents have
Mm-hmm.
were doing in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so in that way, it meant a little bit of like forgetting who like this identity of being Mexican,
Mm-hmm.
because I just had to keep learning English, and luckily my parents were very conscious of that, and we're at home we're going to speak Spanish, and
Mm-hmm.
everywhere else like we'll ask you to translate for us.
Did your parents speak English?
So my dad was. They were both taking some classes at night,
Mhm.
and eventually my dad, yeah, he speaks English. My mom less so. She's a little bit more self conscious about it.
Mhm.
Um, so anyway, so this idea of like language was, um, I had overlooked,
Mhm.
and it wasn't until I think early high school years that I was just having a hard time speaking because I didn't know a lot of words because I was spending half the time learning them and half the time trying to stay connected to Spanish.
Mhm.
So I remember my theater teacher had bought me a book, a poem book, um, that was both in English and Spanish, and it was a Pablo Neruda book, and it was very like romantic and rich, which was a little bit of the writing that I was doing in that theater class. Um, so I remember this idea of like, oh, like there's a little bit of mystery in Spanish, not for me necessarily, but for people who don't know it. Um, and so this idea of Spanish just became a way for me to communicate in a non-direct way
Hmm.
because I can be very personal and very careful and like not open a lot very easily.
Hmm.
And so when I was considering my solo show, I was like, like this idea of bilingualness, like I haven't really shared a lot with. A little bit because I had forgotten about it, and a little bit because I don't know if there's a place for it because people like to know and understand and see and witness art in a way where they can just take it in and it's very passive sometimes.
Mhm.
But I had just gotten so frustrated with that I was like, like I don't have to do my art for everyone. And in that, sometimes I'm forgetting the people that I'm not doing art for, which for me were like my parents. Like I knew that if they were going to attend, like, and if I were speaking English the whole time, like they wouldn't understand a lot
Hmm.
of it. So in a way, it was for me like this little moment where I'm speaking Spanish is for them,
Mhm.
and it's for us to remember this very personal portion of our identity.
Mhm.
Um, and for the English speakers, like I can make it accessible to them, and they can choose. They can empower themselves to find that translation if they're so curious about it. Um, so that's sort of how that identity of being bilingual has like been more apparent in my work
Mhm.
now, where I'm very careful about it and um, definitely place choice on who's listening.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, as I can dissect every like my queer and Mexican identity even more, but that's just like one example of like how that journey of this one identity has like made itself uh, emerge in my work.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
In writing about an earlier piece, Solo with You, a project that you presented in 2021, you ask the questions, what does it mean to create, and what toll does it take on our mental state? When do we give ourselves permission to love someone the way We deserve to love ourselves first. Can we look at each other as living, compassionate humans despite the struggle we witness on the outside? Can you tell us more about that project and the questions that you asked?
Yeah, so um, I'm sort of feeling that that question of like mental toll a little bit because I'm in a new project,
Mm-hmm.
and it um, I think that struggle just comes from, I think for me, just being intentional and truthful of like why I'm doing it. Um, and I think at that point for Solo with You, it was reflecting back on the 9 years and the pieces that I had made in Milwaukee and Chicago and Minneapolis, and like I have like these versions of myself that have existed in past
Mm-hmm.
times, and I was like, what? Who are they, and like how do they live in the same place? And I think that mental challenge for me was like trying to be a little pragmatic and logistical about it, of like how do I make sense of them and how do I place them while honoring what they were and how I felt. And particularly, I think, uh, like first question of like um, mentally questioning who I am and like being okay with it came from the piece that I had made in Chicago called Undertow,
Hmm.
where it arose from a metaphor of like, or actually a fear of being in open water at night, and this idea of not being able to see a horizon or really see distinguish up and down,
Hmm.
but knowing that you have to stay afloat and you have to stay active and aware for an unmeasurable amount of time. And I feel like that metaphor to me was, when I was making that piece, I knew that that was arising from it, and like the motifs of like the movement came from feeling off balance and feeling horizontal, and that question of like why, what is this? Like where does it go?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I remember like I was in my studio apartment in Chicago, and I was just like struggling with knowing what this piece wanted to be, and I was like, oh my god, like this, it is a metaphor for how I'm feeling right now of like what my place is in dance,
Mm-hmm.
where I'm like trying to stay in it and stay present and make work and get my voice out there, but not knowing how to do it or when I will feel accepted or accomplished. And that was like a lot of the mental checks for myself of like feeling defeated, and it that my voice was just not strong enough or didn't know what it was. Um, and then the following question of like um, loving oneself, I that had emerged from like an experience when I had moved here to Minneapolis, and again I was trying to like reinvent a version of myself that in terms of relationships, and I think this may come into the previous question of identity. And so this idea of like being queer like was a thread through my like freshman year in high school, and then college, where I was able to, like, again, drift away from my parents a little bit and create some distance. And then part of that was because of my queer identity that I just didn't fully accept. And part of that was because of just how Catholic my
Yeah.
family was and is. And so in that way, I was being uh, very secretive and not sharing that version of myself with my parents.
Mm-hmm.
And I was living my best life with it, outside of their periphery. And it, in retrospect, like, influenced some of my relationships. And when I landed in Minneapolis, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to say yes to whatever person is choosing to be around me.
Mm-hmm.
And I lost myself in that. Like, I was trying to become something that I wasn't. I was saying yes a lot
Mm-hmm.
to fit myself into this individual's experience and their ideas um, of how they've lived their queer life. And I I was so ready to, like, love someone and just lose myself in that romanticism
Mm-hmm.
that I hadn't before. And I lost myself in that. I just, like, I didn't know who I was. And, like, I think a part of that was because I just wasn't really being honest with myself of, like, what I stand for and what I believe, in this queer identity and what it means. And it just didn't, it, um, I was being, I think, too personal with it and having these experiences live inside of me of how I show love to others and not myself. Um, so when this piece came, it was called The Last Strike of Gold. And I just felt so defeated of, like, like, this idea of, like, love or romanticism, uh, with this particular individual. Just, like, I couldn't see past it, and I just saw the end. And I started to question, like, why it has to be the end, and why the end uh, can't be something else and can't be revealing, which for me was, like, myself, and, like, really taking time to reflect on how to say yes to myself. Um, so this idea of, like, loving oneself and accepting oneself was just, like, it took me a long time to empower myself and, like, know who I was,
Mm-hmm.
and navigate the world and others with that in mind, where I could, um, say yes to people and still say yes to myself, and not lose any idea of who I am in
Mm-hmm.
that process.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so these questions arose from, like, again, those reflective years of navigating dance and this version of myself that was, like, trying to find love and queer love out there without first looking at myself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and then lastly, like, the idea of human complexity. Like, how do we look beyond, like, appearances and each other and know that there's this multidimensionality of a person that, um, and I think the easy way of looking at it is just, I don't know, sometimes I dress very formal or like very comfortable, and like people compliment me, I'm like, yeah, like this, I am doing an extra effort to like look presentable,
But
but it's
with fun
probably
socks.
because, right, yeah, exactly, to like try and show some appeal in like externally, but it comes from like feeling uh like maybe my artistic life is like I I have no control over it, or like I have no idea what it is. So like I'm trying to balance that with how I'm dressing today, or feeling uh, getting a new haircut or something. It's just like these little nuances that are just like very um, appearances are just like it's a choice and it's an extension because there's some other part that's like trying to like make progress forward.
Mm.
um and so there's
Hmm.
like there's always, when I look at others and when everyone's like happy or joyful or like um and I believe it and I believe others, but there's a part of me that's like, what else, like let's spend more time together, let's, because it takes a while to like really get to the sub layers of people.
Yeah. Let's see
um
what's in there.
right, yeah, and it's just like really trying to like be aware of that for me, and I feel like that's just how I try and navigate sometimes, because I know that that's what I do. I know that
Mm.
that's that I can come across like shy or introverted, but it is because there's a little bit of like apprehension and trying to like really be clear and direct and intentional. Um, but then there's the other side where I just like let loose with the people that I know are comfortable and like will hold me regardless. Um, so yeah, that question of like how do we see beyond uh, appearances is like it's still very prevalent to not just my approach to art making, but just being human. Um, and I think that's what I ask of people too in return. So
How does your solo work feel different from your ensemble work?
um, uh, I laugh because I've had recent conversations of um, more anxiety with ensemble work.
Oh, uh-huh.
um, I'll I there's a, I'm experiencing a bigger curve in learning, and I the last couple of weeks I've kept saying yes, I accept. I'm not resisting. Uh, but inside, I am knotted with like anxiety, and like I am like mentally trying to like think of all of these contingency plans.
Yeah. I hear you. I do
And
the same thing.
yeah, and it's like how do I get somewhere, or how do I let go of this dream, which the dream is this event that eventually culminates.
Mhm.
How do I am I okay letting it go? um which is a little bit different than my solo shows, because i I get really stubborn
Mm.
and get really uh motivated when people tell me no,
Oh.
that it's not possible, and I just like I reply with a no, and I reply with I'm still gonna do it. So I get really narrow focused, and then I'm like, I this specifically for solo with you, like it was 2021, so there was, I think, before or during the second wave of COVID
Mm-hmm.
that I was asking myself, am I really going to do this?
Mm, right.
And I could not wait. Like there was just no other possibility. I knew that if I waited, I just wasn't going to do it. So, and I was very fortunate because people were telling me yes, and like, um, and they were supporting me. Which I did not expect at all. Um, and I knew that the only job I had to do was just to keep saying yes to myself and like make it, just keep at it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which again with the ensemble work, it's just I'm also choosing, right? Like I'm choosing to stay open to my ensemble and the collaborators around me, where I can offer space for their own voices and ideas. So in that way, it's a little slower moving, because again we all have different lives and experiences, and we're all navigating. Um, so I'm saying yes to that portion of I will wait. I can wait. Where the narrow focus Jose is like you can just say no. All the doors are closed. Everyone will just have to say yes to your vision and your decision making, and we're all going to move forward. Um,
Hmm.
so I am choosing one over the other, and I am choosing the process uh, over the product. Um, and and again, that's led with like my heart and my emotion, knowing that eventually, like the mental part of me, the logistical side of me, will get to that logistical point of like decision making where um, I'll put on like that harder exterior of myself and say, um, I can't be flexible anymore. Like we are moving forward. Um, which again is like not uh, the best version, but it has some space in there. Like, and I think it's important.
Right, right.
Um, so yeah, the ensemble work is, and that would just more layers and
Yeah.
more voices and possibilities,
Mm-hmm.
and I do lean on what I do know, which is how to create movement and how to create solos, and I lean on uh, that practice of creating solos and having them like little markers in this big um, in this house that we're building. They're like the corner foundation, and everything else is like can be filled with the voices of the ensemble.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or eventually, like I have to like start putting the walls up and
Mm.
everything else. Um, so I movement wise, like I've created, I would say about 20 minutes worth of solo that uh, is flexible enough that it can become
Mm-hmm.
trio and a duet, and it can be influenced by their own version of what is existing,
Mm-hmm.
um, which I'm interested in, and I'm curious how they will uh, either fit themselves or change what is already there. Um, so yeah, a lot of more dimension and possibility in the ensemble work that just creates a little more uncertainty.
Right. Well, I feel
But
like, especially just listening to you speak about it, that ensemble work asks for decisions and boundary making,
Hmm.
whereas solo work does less of that because it's one person making decisions.
Hmm.
Um, and I think boundaries for everybody are evolving,
Hmm.
and sometimes we don't know what they are until we're faced with them, you know.
Right.
And even
Hmm.
at that moment, it's like I'm not sure what my boundary is, you know.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, totally. And that is that part of possibility that lingers, that it's just like, yeah, like it can be yeses all around until there's that one no.
Mhm.
And then we all gotta decide where we go from that no. um, and and actually I've had those two no's already in this process, which is probably why I'm like, oh, okay. um, which again, I go back to like, okay, yes, I accept the no's, and it is, could be worse. The no's could happen later on. So I gotta learn really quickly. uh, I gotta process like the grief and the anger and the
Mm,
sadness of this
mm,
no.
mm,
And I gotta get back on it, because again, otherwise I will not be able to like support the others that are saying yes.
mhm,
um, so I'm in a state of like constant learning, and it takes me some time, but I know I'll get there. Or I'm positive, and I'm projecting that it'll happen one way or another. So
yeah,
yeah.
it's exciting.
Hmm. It's risky.
Thrilling. We'll use the word thrilling.
Mm-hmm. There we go. Love it.
um, you mentioned to me that you are recently interested in work beyond your own. For example, how to support others, which you've talked about a bit,
Hmm.
and how to involve movement outside the stage tradition of theaters. Can you talk more
Hmm.
about that?
Yeah, I um in my junior and senior year in college, I was dancing for a site-specific company in Milwaukee,
Hmm.
um, Wild Space, and in hindsight, I did not take advantage as much of it as I think, and I think it was because I was being not so generous. I was, I just didn't understand. Like, I couldn't see the big picture because I was in it as
Hmm.
a dancer.
Hmm.
Um, and more recently, like, especially coming from COVID, like, there were a lot of things happening outside, and I, it's a different modality of working where there's more there's more opportunity for uh, possibilities to happen, like in nature, other people walking, construction. There's things that are more out of control, and that you have to either accept them or not.
Hmm.
Um, so in that way, I'm like interested in going back to these ideas of how do I stay off the stage more, or how do I allow my vision and perception of how I see theaters to shift, and how do I craft that for audiences as well? Like, how do I engage with them and have them engage in a new way,
Hmm.
where again they just don't have to show up and be passive.
Hmm.
And And I say that with um, being myself, passive when I go see performances, where sometimes I do check out, or sometimes I'm distracted, or I like uh, get annoyed at someone that's like walking past or like coughing or whatever. There's just like um, I am curious in like how I can be more engaged into what I am witnessing and observing, and still have the ability to feel comfortable in that. And I say that because there are performances where audiences are asked to participate, and I really hate it.
You
I
hate being
hate
on the
being
audience
asked.
side.
Yes, I hate
Yeah.
being asked to like uh, offer my voice or like throw a suggestion, and I think it comes from like not knowing
Yeah.
that that's coming. So I'm like I'm trying to balance like how do I craft that opportunity for audience engagement,
Hmm.
perhaps in a less direct way,
Hmm.
but also like uh, be conscious of who they are and why they're there,
Hmm.
which again can be multiple reasons to like support, be distracted, um, be curious, etc., etc. And so I specifically consider like uh, right the extremes of like a theater and then outside, and so these things are sort of coming together like in a gallery space where uh, audiences are they have the freedom to go wherever they want and engage with whatever art they see and witness.
Hmm.
um, but in that it's visual art mostly, and so I'm curious how to craft experiences for audience to just consider how they engage with art, and that can be in the performance side of things as like a performer, like how do you step off the stage, and how do you I was writing a proposal that consisted of my routine to perform and be a dancer, which is I don't know, it's a practice for sure of like um, of not eating, like 2 or 3 hours before a performance.
Mm-hmm.
um, it is like putting some taking care of my skin routine. It is warming up but not being too warmed up, and it is about like exercising a little bit. So it's like all of these things that like take 3 hours or so,
Yeah.
and it's things that like audiences don't see and are just maybe not that interested in.
Right.
But I know that like I am like working
Hmm.
for 3 hours before a performance. It's
Hmm.
like this this exists, and this is part of the performance art that exists off the stage.
Hmm.
So how's there room for this to exist, and for audiences to like
To,
witness and consider their own uh, habits and patterns, right? Like
hmm.
we all have morning routines or evening routines. um, so I'm just interested in like in witnessing and providing space for these very like uh, normal things, or things that are just so mundane or that people don't think of, that um, but that we all share. So
Hmm.
I'm like really interested in
Hmm.
that thread.
Hmm.
But
I like it.
mhm.
And I totally know what you mean about the pre-performance ritual. It's like
Hmm.
Lengthy.
Hmm. Yeah.
um, who or what inspires you?
Um, I think more recently has been my fellow like artists, and I say that more recently because I remember like in Chicago in my early years here in Minneapolis, like I wouldn't see dance or any
Hmm.
performances
Mm-hmm.
because I would lose myself in what I was watching because I didn't really know or embody myself. Um, and so now, like when I see friends that are like making their own solo performances or having a practice or a gathering and speaking of their relationship with dance or movement,
Mm-hmm.
um, it just like really motivates me to consider the questions that they're asking themselves
Mm-hmm.
and find my own way of like navigating with or through those questions as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it informs me of what I don't know and brings attention to what is important for others. And it helps me find myself like where I am in my career. If I'm like really, really doing my own thing and like so distant that I'm just being oblivious to others, or if I am like unintentionally, like unknowingly, like intersecting and with other artists that are in discovery and motion as well, which allows future ideas of like, oh, like maybe there's this is room for a collaboration or more conversations that needs to happen, or if we are able to shift the dynamic and the relationship of dance that maybe has existed for so long that it just may need new time to like be questioned,
Mm-hmm.
and that can be like practices um, of the roles of being a dancer and a choreographer or a collaborator of like what do we need more of, more dialogue, more um, permission to say yes, to say no, fluidity and schedules, etc., etc. So I'm really, yeah, motivated by my own peers who are in the same modality of questioning
Hmm.
uh, their relationship with dance, particularly.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Um, you have a new evening length piece coming up in September at the Red Eye Theater. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that's the new ensemble work that I'm questioning uh, a lot of things. I, it came from uh, the identity of being Mexican, and particularly emotionally, this piece started because my mom had said that she was ready to move back to Mexico,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I just didn't really know how to accept that. I didn't really know what it meant for me,
Mm-hmm.
and that was like again that like self-reflective question of like, oh, Jose doesn't have to mean anything for you. Like, this is your mom's decision and it's what's best for her.
Mm.
Um, and I was like, okay, yeah. And so I reflected on like what she had left and behind in Mexico, which was her family, and to bring my brothers and I and have a better life here. And that part of her life is complete.
Mm.
So yes, it makes sense that she has this desire to go back. And I just have to, yeah, accept it. So yeah, emotionally I was trying to figure out like how to honor that part of my identity of leaving and returning,
Mm-hmm.
specifically with my mom's decision. And so I felt like an urgency to like make this work. Um, and then part of that was that I connected it to mariachi band, which is just, I think, one of the core identities of Mexico.
Mm.
And and mentally, logistically, I was like, okay, well, I don't have money for that. uh, but let's figure out like why I have that interest and like what that really means.
Mm-hmm.
So I started to listen, pinpoint like one solo instrument that I connected with it, and that was the trumpet. And I was like, okay, I think the trumpet is where I'm starting from. And so I started to like hear and listen like what the trumpet uh, was telling me without even hearing it. And it was this call and response sort of thing. And it was this call for land and for Mexico and this call for family. And then there was an audition for choreographer's evening, and usually it's a piece that's 7 minutes or under. And again, I was uh, a little upset. I'm like, well, I'm just gonna make it 5 pieces. So now there's like no question, and I will just use this 5 minutes for anything else. Um, so I made a solo that was 5 minutes, and I was lucky enough to like find a trumpet soundtrack. So emotionally, the piece started with my mom and this trumpet, and then logistically, it went into this 5 minute solo. And I was like, okay, I got a solo, and the solo started from a formation of how my last ensemble piece in June ended, which was with 3 dancers. And I was like, I just know I want to start in this same formation, um, but I need to figure out like what the other 2 dancers are doing. And then I started working of a walking pattern. And so I was like, okay, cool. Like I have this little solo slash trio, solo slash non solo, and I think there are 3 versions of this. So then I made another solo with it and a new walking pattern. And in that second walking pattern, I started to see time, specifically with the 2 dancers that are walking. And then I
Mm.
was like, okay, this it's starting to form. And um, even though these dancers are coming at a more like logistical uh, choreographic goal to like push myself. There's more in there, and then I just like let that be. I like was like, all right, there's still a third solo in this thing that's happening, but I can't come to peace with it, and I don't know what it is. So let me
Mhm.
work on another solo and like what the beginning of the piece is.
Mhm.
So I moved on, and then this new solo came and is coming, and I'm like, okay, this feels that it has a heart to it, and it has this essence of my choreographic and dance voice in it. So this feels great, and this how do I develop from this? And then again, I got frustrated. I was like, all right, let me think of how I want the piece to end. I just like keep bouncing around because I just keep being frustrated. I'm like, all right, well, I need to make these decisions one way or another, and like eventually. So,
Yeah.
um, I was like, the ending's always hard. Um, and I was like, we're not gonna dance. I had taken a trip to Oaxaca to visit my mom because she eventually did buy her one way ticket. I was like, I'm gonna check in on her, and of course, being in Oaxaca, so Oaxaca is where my dad's side of the family is from.
Okay.
So that's where she chose to go. And there's again a morning routine of a rooster, of a garbage truck bell, of some dogs, construction, uh, getting or making hot chocolate, getting the fresh bread. And I was like, this is life, and I am very much in it. And the other part of it is like, um, my mom had just like washed clothes, and you just use the sun to dry it. So you let it out to dry, and I was like, this is that routine that I'm interested in and seeing and letting others see.
Mhm.
And it has been from that initial memory of like being 4 years old, like that. I remember that in Veracruz, and I am experiencing it here in Oaxaca 28 years later. Um, and it's ingrained to maybe more so like my mom's experience. Um, and I, as the viewer, am witnessing this and still witness this. Um, so I was like, I want to do that. Like I want to share that vision and that world, um, with the people here because it is part of my identity and my lineage. And so when I came back to Minneapolis, like I think that's the ending. Like we
Mhm.
are, I guess, spoiler alert. um, I
There's
think that
still a lot of
is
time between now and then. It might shift. Who
right.
knows?
That is true. Yes, this is version one, as I like to say, version one ending. Um, I think that that memory has a specific
Mhm.
moment in this piece
Mhm.
because again, it feels real and authentic, and it's part of an experience.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I have these beginning and little choreographic middle section that I'm like, okay, yeah, like, and stepping away from it. There is tension of these two real experiences of land, and then this like choreographic ambition,
Mhm.
which are true. Like I am wanting to push myself, and I'm
Mhm.
still remembering uh, where I come from, like what I'm trying to honor.
Mm-hmm.
And that is tension, and that fits into my identity of being Mexican and being in Minneapolis. And we gotta, I have to choose if I'm accepting that tension to live in that peace, or if I find my way through it and make it make sense, which again is an extension of how I navigate myself daily.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's the big recap of what it is, and like, and how the two dancers that I am working with, like how they place themselves in this very specific memory and experience of mine. Um, I am feeling tension with that as well. Of like, how do I craft their own experience? And I think
Mm-hmm.
um, I see those possibilities, and they see it too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very exciting, and it's very exciting because they also are Mexican, and they come from Mexican lineage, and they have their own experiences of what being Mexican means.
Mm-hmm.
And in that reason, like we are navigating the specific identity together. So um, yeah, so many other layers, but that's the really like exciting part
Mm-hmm.
uh, for me of where I am, despite the anxiety of what it looks like.
Being a
Yeah.
creator.
Yes. Right.
Thank you for sharing all that.
Yeah.
If people want to see that performance, or if they want to learn more about you or other performances that you have coming up, where is a good place for them to find that information?
Yeah. My website that I worked so hard on, which is
It's great.
simply Jose.dance. Um, and it has, yeah, an about page, a bio page, upcoming events, and a little email section where I write my own emails and I send them either bi-monthly or little pauses in between. So I very conscious on what I say and when I say it. And yeah, they can find my Facebook and Vimeo and Instagram uh, links there as well. So Jose.dance is a great place to go for all things Jose.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you.
yeah, thanks for joining us today on the Sanguine Arts Locavart podcast. Have a great day.
Thank, thank you so much, Mary.